Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. After being baptized by the eternal light spell, the scar of death became unusually bright, and looked like a piece of pure sapphire. Warm sunlight fell on it, filling the scar of death with the aura of life. All the undead creatures summoned by the tide of death had disappeared, and so had the vampires that had previously forced them into dire straits. Even the stench of decay that had once permeated the air seemed to be expelled by the eternal light, and the whole world was suddenly purified. However, the 20 Death Knights were unscathed. They rode their shapeshifters and held a sharp sword each. They looked like black statues as they surrounded the young mage and trapped him in the center. The scene scared everyone silly, and all of them suddenly became fully alert after having let down their guard earlier. Nobody would have thought that this would happen. Could these Death Knights be made of steel? Alright, even then, shouldn't they have melted under the scary strength of the magic earlier? How could they be unharmed? What do we do? Adalo looked blankly as he felt utter fear and devastation while looking at these black statues. Adalo could see from between these Death Knights that the young mage was now very weak, his face was pale, and his breathing was shallow as he barely propped himself up with his mage. Yet, his opponents, the 20 Death Knights, stood there unscathed. What do I do? What do I do? Do I attack? Adalo mopped his sweat as he felt anxious while being caught in a dilemma. He had two choices now, one was to help, and another was to escape with the teleportation scroll. The first choice was undoubtedly a gamble that the powerful 20 Death Knights might be close to being defeated. However, if he bet wrongly, he'd have to pay with his life. The second option was much safer, but if he did that, then his mentor Cheyenne's entire plan would come to an end. Adalo was not the only one in a dilemma, as Rena, Uchfalusi, and the rest were also stuck at a crossroad themselves. They realized that the 20 Death Knights did not do anything after surrounding Lin Li, but remained there quietly, almost as if they were protecting him. Hence, both parties carried on without making a move. Perhaps Lin Li was the only one who wasn't nervous at all, for only he knew what kind of magic he had used earlier. That was a level 21 eternal light spell, known as the holiest of all magic. It was comparable to the holy cleansing spell of the brilliant shrine when used against undead creatures and demons. With just one blow, even a lich or a demon lord would be heavily wounded, much less a mere Death Knight. They had not been purified simply because he had had no such intention. But, Lin Li did not have the time to explain this. He was really busy. Adalo thought that Lin Li looked very weak, but, on the contrary, Lin Li felt stronger than ever. After using the eternal light spell, Lin Li was immersed in a strange state. It was hard to describe it, but if he had to do so, he could only say that he felt unimaginably powerful, scarily so. He felt as though he held the world in his hand, and even the Death Knights that he had been no match for were now as tiny as ants to him. He could easily crush them with a finger if he wanted to. Lin Li even felt that if he used the eternal light spell again, he would not even need 3 minutes, no, not even 2 minutes, for it to light up the whole scar of death. The once incredibly complicated elemental structure was now clear to him, and the power of the magic that he had been once incapable of manipulating suddenly yielded to him. It was as if all he had to do was say the spell, and this level 21 magic would do as he wished. Lin Li knew that this was a gift from the eternal light spell. Even though he was still at the peak of level 18, and his abilities did not change much from before, after he used the eternal light spell, his understanding and grasp of magic were entirely different from before. This had to be what they called experience. There was a difference between having used a legendary realm magic and not having done so, definitely a difference. Even though he'd relied on the power of the multicolored potion, the spell came from his mouth, and the elemental structure was pieced together by his mental strength. This couldn't be changed, so this level 21 magic had left a deep mark in his brain. There was no greater wealth than this in the eyes of a mage. If he did not have enough mana, he could supplement it with potions, and if he lacked mental strength, he could also make up for it with magical equipment. If he lacked the knowledge, he could also rely on his books. However, if he did not have enough experience, there was nothing he could rely on. Why was a good magic teacher so important? It was because they could pass an entire lifetime's worth of experience to you, which could help save you from many wrong turns in your journey of learning magic. If magic was like a vast sea with no boundaries, then a mage apprentice was like a tiny boat in the middle of the sea, and the teacher was like a guiding light pointing him in the right direction. But, some experience couldn't be taught even with the brightest light. Many things could only be understood, but not verbally taught. Only after one had experienced them would one truly understand what they were like. Just like Lin Li, his teacher was Andoan, a legendary mage renowned in Amril, who even had a good chance of becoming an arbitrator. Logically speaking, Lin Li had talent and passion, even mastering close to 10 core magical mantras, so coupled with the legendary realm teacher he had who was not afraid to teach him everything he knew, Lin Li should have reached the legendary realm by now. Why had he not done so, then? That was because he did not accumulate enough experience. The legendary realm was like a pavilion in the air. Many mages spent an entire lifetime trying to reach it, but they might not even get close, only standing on the side far away as they looked at it respectfully and longingly. Only the lucky ones who found the stairs were able to reach it by following the steps. And these stairs were called experience. After absorbing the gift of the eternal light spell, Lin Li might still be at level 18, and would not look too different, but his understanding of magic would be entirely different. The legendary realm was no longer mysterious to him now, and everything was within reach. As long as he accumulated enough experience, he would be able to take the life-changing step. This was a complicated and slow process, and merely reliving the moment had taken Lin Li an hour. In that hour, the advance party gradually realized that the 20 Death Knights did not look like they were intending to harm the young mage. Still, nobody dared to lower their guard. They were powerful undead creatures that could rival liches and humorous wyrms. Who knew how long this strange situation would continue? What if they decided to do things differently all of a sudden? One attack from them would leave everybody with devastating regrets. With that in mind, everyone remained highly strung up and ready to go. Until an hour later. "Alright, the fight is over, keep your weapons," Lin Li said, something that nobody would have thought of as he suddenly opened his eyes. What surprised them more was that after Lin Li said that, the 20 Death Knights really did as he said and kept their weapons. The strongest of them even jumped off his shapeshifter and knelt on one knee before Lin Li. "We await your orders, Master." The Death Knight's voice was hoarse and deep, but everyone heard it clearly. My God, Adalo's eyes were as round as saucers now. This was even scarier than the level 21 magic from before. How could this Felix command the Death Knights? Has this world gone mad? Even the tide of death was not able to summon them, and even liches could not control them. Even a fool knew that only a retribution knight could give orders to them. Could it be that the magic from earlier was not the eternal light spell, but a mysterious ritual that could make a human a retribution knight? Of course, Adalo could not be blamed for thinking that way. He was only an archmage at the peak of level 17, after all, and even though he had a legendary realm teacher, he was still far away from the legendary realm himself. He had only heard of level 21 magic like the eternal light spell, and all he knew was at most that the eternal light spell was the bane of all evil existences. When it came to the details regarding the eternal light spell, perhaps even his legendary teacher would not be able to give a detailed explanation. As in the legendary realm, a level could make a whole lot of difference. Naturally, a level 20 mage would not know a level 21 spell in detail. Only Lin Li, who had used the eternal light spell himself, knew that this level 21 magic was called the bane of all evil existence, not only because of its devastating powers. Legendary magic was called realm magic because all the rules besides time and space could be altered in this realm, and that applied to light and darkness as well. Under the cover of the eternal light realm, even the holy light could become the gloomy dark. Of course, this change was not a long-lasting one. The holy light abided by the holy rules, and even though it was not the strongest in the world, it was definitely the purest. The purer the rules, the harder it was to alter them, and even if it was a domain created from the eternal light spell, it merely allowed the change between light and dark to last a short while. But even a split second was enough for Lin Li. In that split second, the holy light became the gloomy dark. In that split second, Lin Li was the incarnation of the gloomy dark itself, a retribution knight born from the gloomy dark. None of the Death Knights could go against his wishes, and everything became much more simple. He could easily brand their soul fire using his mental strength. The most straightforward and effective method of controlling an undead creature was to use one's mental strength to leave a brand on their soul fire. This was much easier than a blood oath or a soul contract, as no spells or rituals were needed. All it needed was a little bit of mental strength, but this was provided that the mental strength was not met with resistance by the other party. Of course, this nearly instantaneous way of doing it had a fault, as the brand would weaken over time and eventually vanish. The undead creature it controlled would thus be freed as a result. However, this was not important to Lin Li, as his motive was merely to have these 20 Death Knights protect him for the time being. This was the Scar of Death, where there were countless creatures born from the dark, after all. Dangers hid at every turn along the way. Who knew if he might suddenly be surrounded by hundreds of vampires again? He would be stuck in a predicament if he did not have the Death Knight's protection. Thus, Lin Li spared their lives when he used the Eternal Light spell, and used the domain energy of the Eternal Light spell to change the holy rules of the Holy Light instead. He turned the Holy Light into the dark in a split second, and then used that dark energy to control the 20 Death Knights. He did not need a long time either. A couple of days would be more than enough, and if he could find the gloomy dark, it would not matter even if the Death Knights were no longer under his control. All of this happened and ended within a second. Nobody but Lin Li knew what had actually transpired. Even a seasoned archmage like Adalo only knew that the young mage had used magic of devastating powers in that second, but he was perplexed as to what happened with the 20 Death Knights. But whatever it was, he definitely needed to change his original plans. According to his plans, this young mage and his companions, as well as the 4 bandits, including Reggie, were supposed to be sacrificed when they destroyed the altar. But now, Adalo dared not even think of doing that. Sacrifice a mage who could use a level 21 legendary magic and control Death Knights? That was crazy. The advance party suddenly became incredibly powerful after the Death Knights joined. They had been running away to escape the thousands of skeletal warriors previously, but their journey through the Scar of Death was now unbelievably smooth. Even the largest groups of skeletal warriors could not withstand a blow from the Death Knights, and often all they heard was a crushing sound before the skeletal warriors turned into a scattered pile of bones. As Lin Li looked at this landslide victory for their side, he could not help but secretly feel thankful that he had taken the multicolored potion earlier and had studied the Eternal Light spell prior to this, and also thankful that Ujfalusi's Tide of Death had bought him those 3 minutes of time earlier. If something had gone wrong in this whole process, he would have been squashed into a pulp by these Death Knights. Mage Felix, look, the advance party moved at an astonishing speed, and they had passed through the danger zone filled with undead creatures in just under 2 hours. After they carried on for another 200 meters or so, Adalo stopped suddenly. Lin Li looked where Adalo was pointing. There was a lot of weeds, something uncommon in the Scar of Death, growing underneath the mountain wall ahead of them. Amongst the weeds was the opening of the cave that looked like a beast opening its maw. A chilly aura came from within the cave. Indeed, as Lin Li stopped in his tracks, he knew immediately that Adalo had not been spouting nonsense. The aura coming from within the cave was the gloomy dark's aura that he was familiar with. It was profound and mysterious, just like the nature of the dark itself. The opening of the cave was unusually narrow, and even the Death Knights had to abandon their shapeshifters to continue on foot. They wore heavy black armor and held swords crafted from ice, and when they walked into the cave, it was like a drop of cold water in a boiling pot of oil, making the oil sizzle immediately. Everyone felt the earth shaking as swarms of skeletal warriors appeared from the ground with their eerie white bones and swinging machetes. The silence in the cave was broken all of a sudden, just like how the fights with undead creatures usually were. There was no shouting or screaming, only the mind-numbing sounds of weapons hacking away at bones. A dense black fog continued to come from deep within the cave. Many hell ghouls and liches hidden in the fog fired death fire bombs at them. The heck, Lin Li was shocked by the sudden attack as the undead creatures that had appeared just now were vastly different from the ones outside, be it the skeletal warriors or the liches. These skeletal warriors were at least level 8, and the liches were even somewhere near level 18. What kind of an existence was a level 18 lich? Even Bosker that had used a death sentence back in the Shadowglen was only level 16. Lin Li chanted spells with all his might as he angrily complained, "Damn it, it's the gloomy dark again." This fight lasted for a whole hour, and Adalo was near the point of exhaustion before these skeletal warriors close to level 10 had all been wiped out. However, the hell ghouls and liches hidden in the black fog did not seem harmed at all, and, for some reason, disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. When Lin Li was done with the skeletal warriors and wanted to deal with them, he could not find even a trace of them. "Don't let me bump into you again." Cursing at them internally, Lin Li never thought that he would not only bump into them shortly afterward, but more than once as well. Honestly, the advance party had been bumping into them continuously throughout their nearly half a day's journey. Each time there had been an influx of skeletal warriors sprouting from the ground and many hell ghouls and liches hidden in the black fog, all the while hurling deathfire bombs at them with an infuriating half-heartedness as though they were only doing so just for the sake of being there. The advance party had entered the cave in the afternoon, but they were still stuck in the maze-like tunnel all the way until the evening. In Adalo's words, they had only traveled less than 10% of the journey, yet their party encountered more than 20 battles. Every fight was as big as the next one, and they never won easily. It was always a few hundred skeletal warriors, a few dozen hell ghouls, and a few liches who fought merely for the sake of being there. Although they did not lose anybody in these fights, everyone was nearing exhaustion, including Lin Li. Fights at this level were the most torturous as they always thought they had lost all hope, and that they would never be able to see the end of their enemies. Lin Li even thought that someone was bound to be driven to the brink of insanity if this continued. "Mage Adalo, we can't carry on like this. Let's have a talk." After one of the fights, Lin Li really could not bear it any longer, and silently pulled Adalo aside to talk during a break. Well, Adalo hesitated before he nodded quickly. He was a man of reason, after all, and he knew very well that they were all in this predicament together. If this young mage was to meet with any harm, Adalo's life would not be smooth sailing, either. Even though he had the teleportation scroll that could protect him, he would not be able to face teacher Cheyenne if he failed his task. Moreover, this young mage was a worthy partner indeed. Capabilities aside, the 20 Death Knights alone were the strongest amongst the advance party, and the success of his mission depended on them. Hence, Adalo did not hesitate for long. "Alright, Mage Felix. If you insist, I can tell you the truth. I'm here at the Scar of Death to complete a task given to me by my teacher. My teacher is called Cheyenne. He is the legendary mage of Aminya City, but not many know that he was the previous patriarch of the Manhwa family. He had already been to the Blackstone Mountains many years ago. After that, he would return every year to stay here for some time." I knew it. Lin Li was not really surprised to hear this, as he had long guessed that the Manhwa family had close relations to a legendary mage. Now, Adalo was merely confirming his suspicions. However, he was not expecting this close relation to be of such a level. If Cheyenne was the previous patriarch of the Manhwa family, wouldn't that make him that idiot Harvey's grandfather? When he thought of this, Lin Li began to feel somewhat cautious. According to what Adalo said, Cheyenne was already a powerful mage of the legendary realm, and there were few things in the world that could make him visit the Blackstone Mountains every year. Could it be the gloomy dark in the cave? It was not good news that he had his eye on the same thing as a legendary mage. "Oh, right. Mage Felix, I wonder what you think of the Scar of Death." After giving a simple introduction of his teacher, Adalo did not continue, but instead changed the topic abruptly. "The Scar of Death?" Lin Li frowned. "I think that there is a strange energy flowing through this place. It seems capable of fueling an endless supply of undead creatures, and undead creatures fueled by this energy will be stronger than ever." Adalo smiled as he finished the sentence. "Mage Felix, you share the same thoughts with my teacher. He was here 20 years ago, and said the same thing you just did." "Is that so?" We met with 2 fights, the other time we went into the Scar of Death. During the first fight, we had to deal with a lot of skeletal warriors, and barely made it out by escaping through the cave from last night. The second fight was in the cave, but unfortunately, I was already unconscious, and did not witness the fight. I only knew that I was back in Aminya City when I woke up. My teacher had brought me back. His magical wave became very weak after that, not much different from that of an archmage. Oh? Lin Li was surprised, though he knew that it was possible. Wasn't that just like what had happened to Edgefalusi? After the battle in Sire Town, he dropped from a legendary Lich to a level 18 archmage, but this was because of the powerful holy light that was used to destroy the humorous domain, causing Edgefalusi to drop from the legendary realm. But what had happened to Cheyenne? Lin Li was filled with questions, but he did not ask anything, merely nodding his head as he listened quietly to Adalo. He knew very well that since Adalo had started his story with this incident, he'd definitely explain everything to him later. Truth was that Lin Li was right about that. After heaving a gentle sigh, Adalo continued, Teacher Cheyenne did not tell me much about what happened in the cave. The only thing he told me was that he met a very powerful enemy there, the strongest he had ever met, and the fight was a really tough one. My teacher did win in the end, but it was a marginal win, almost negligible, and he realized that this opponent's power was very strange, just as though it was linked to the Scar of Death. It could not be killed no matter what my teacher did, and in the end, he had to sacrifice his legendary power to seal it temporarily. Even then, he has to come back every year to reinforce that seal. That's a very interesting story, Lin Li smiled, and then asked a strange question. Isn't that great? Why send the advance party to the Scar of Death, then? Because a few years later, my teacher found something about the Scar of Death in some of the ruins left behind by the High Elves. Oh? It was a diary written by a High Elf noble. Maybe because it is too old, most of the writings have become blurry. The only discernible portion was about studies on necromagic. A large number of High Elven nobles had allegedly been swayed by the idea of a living god, and started looking for ways to pursue immortality. Hence, necromagic appeared on their radar, and they thought that this was the only way to immortality. Some of those High Elven nobles set up a base in the Blackstone Mountains to conduct research. Unfortunately, they only just got started before the war broke out, and they had to devote their limited resources to the fight while putting their research on hold. Adalo paused for a bit here. As for what happened after that, it was all written in the books. The Allied army defeated the 6 sky castles and killed the High Elves' queen next to the Tree of Eternity, ending the dark and cruel rule of the High Elves. The research base remained hidden in the Blackstone Mountains, lost forever in the River of Time. Lin Li listened quietly as though it had nothing to do with him. If anyone saw how calm he looked, they would never guess how emotional this young mage actually was. Lin Li took a long breath before he finally managed to somewhat calm himself down, but Adalo's words continued to echo in his mind. His words immediately brought a person to Lin Li's mind, or, should he say, a high elf. Indeed, it was Norfeller's previous master, the half-brother of the High Lord, the one who had turned himself into a lich in the underground palace at the Demon Fall Valley, Giovanni. Lin Li did not know much about Giovanni. All he knew was that he was the first one to study necromagic amongst the High Elves, and he was the first person to treat necromagic as the way to immortality. According to Norfeller's memory, this was all because Giovanni had stumbled upon the grave of the immortal king. As for the location and the secrets hidden in the grave, Norfeller knew little of it. The existence of the immortal king itself was a mystery that the High Elves had yet to uncover, and even the unlucky Lin Li, who was mistaken for the immortal king twice in a row, only heard something about it from Edgefalusi after he made a soul contract with the Lich. The immortal king had probably appeared somewhere between the Dark Ages and the prehistoric times, when the fights between the dragons and the titans had just ended and the High Elves born from the Tree of Eternity had just risen. In the tales of the High Elves, the immortal king was said to be the strongest existence in the whole Anrel, and even the High Elves dynasty was established because they had the immortal king's help. Only, for some reason, there were very few accounts about the immortal king in the High Elves' records. Even very important incidents had merely been sloppily recorded, and thus, scholars in the Dark Ages had debated endlessly over the origins of the immortal king. Some thought that the immortal king was the last surviving titan, while some thought that the immortal king was the incarnation of a deity. Some even thought that the immortal king was another persona of the queen herself. All their views differed, but none could convince the others, due to the lack of evidence. Their debates continued for a long time, all the way until the High Elves dynasty was destroyed, and humans occupied more than 80% of Anril. The immortal king's name also became lost in the passage of time. Perhaps Giovanni knew something. Of course, he could not possibly have known much, or Norfeller would not have mistaken Lin Li for the immortal king in the underground palace at the Demon Fall Valley. The powerful soul from the Shadowglen was probably misguided, just like Giovanni had been. Lin Li always thought that this was merely a coincidence, but now, he started feeling some doubts. If this was all a coincidence, wouldn't that be too much of a coincidence, then? They were both high elven nobles who were looking to necromagic to achieve immortality, and both had one of the 7 pieces of debris of the stars. The immortal king appeared here as well. It looked like he'd have to study this thoroughly. Thoughts were running wild in Lin Li's mind, but Adelo continued his story. But my teacher realized that all of this has not ended. The High Elves nobles have left, but the research base continues to run. What? Lin Li was thinking of something when he heard this, and it scared him suddenly. Mage Adelo, surely you're not trying to tell me that a High Elven noble is still running that place after 1,300 years? No, the one running the place is not a High Elf noble, but the altar at the center of the research base camp. The altar you spoke of at the start? That's right, Adelo nodded, and continued. According to my teacher, the design of the altar was at the state-of-the-art level then, and would surely leave anyone in awe. The scar of death is covered in a strange energy because of that altar, as it holds the power to turn living spirits into undead spirits. Every time a living spirit is turned into an undead spirit, it provides power for the altar in the form of a sacrifice, and this power allows the altar to continue working. This convoluted chicken and egg logic confused Lin Li to no end, and he really wanted to curse at Adelo now. Of course, Lin Li did not do so, as he could somewhat comprehend everything Adelo had just said. Adelo's words were a mess, but the idea was there. To put it simply, the altar created a cycle between living and undead spirits, a cycle that never ended. The worst thing was that Lin Li realized from Adelo's words that this was not an unchanging cycle. Rather, it had a snowballing effect, and the undead creatures created by this gloomy dark would become increasingly powerful, and one day overpower the restraints of the gloomy dark. They'd walk out of the scar of death and turn the Blackstone Mountains into the land of the undead. They might even head down the Blackstone Mountains and attack nearby villages and cities. If things got to that state, then the Manhwa family would be in for a ride. The Blackstone Mountains were only half a day's journey from Aminya City, and if the undead creatures left the Blackstone Mountains, their first target would definitely be Aminya City. It'd then be too late, for the undead creatures were not like the army of the Leaden Kingdom, where negotiation was an option if they could not beat them. Once these undead creatures attacked a city, even the most prosperous one would be turned into ruins overnight. Aminya City was the root of the Manhwa family's existence, and if it was destroyed, so was the Manhwa family. The Manhwa family would never allow such a thing to happen, and even though not many things in the world could attract the legendary realm Cheyenne, even he was concerned over this matter, and was trying all sorts of ways to stop this tragedy before it became too late. Let me think, Lin Li's mind was in a mess now. He had already sorted out his thoughts earlier, but was now confused again by Adelo's words. It seemed like this whole thing about the scar of death was much more complicated than he had originally thought. Initially, he'd thought that the gloomy dark was the ruler of the scar of death, and once he had control over the gloomy dark, he would be able to control the whole scar of death, but that did not seem to be the case anymore. The altar that Adelo spoke of seemed to be the one that truly controlled the undead creatures, and it was the true core of the research base. The gloomy dark was at most a source of power for the research base, just like wyrm magical crystal in the eternal furnace. Lin Li was well aware that the power of the gloomy dark was nowhere beneath that of the wyrm magical crystal. And that this research base powered by the power of the gloomy dark was probably comparable to the eternal furnace as well. How could the altar at the center of it be easily destroyed? And not to forget, there was a powerful being sealed in the research base, one that was able to battle it out with Cheyenne. This is so complicated. Lin Li massaged the place between his brows in anguish as he could not think of a solution at all. In the end, he gritted his teeth, and took out the holy light from the ring of endless storm. Honestly, Lin Li did not want to use the holy light at all. It was too dangerous, for once light and darkness came in contact, the explosion it had caused would be comparable to that of legendary magic's power. Back in the endless world, the explosion caused by the holy light and the gloomy dark had blown off nearly half of the Sun Palace. If that happened in the cave now, the dozen of people in the advance party would be blown to bits. But he had no other choice. There were too many undead creatures in the cave, and every step they took was strenuous. It had been an entire afternoon, but they could not even cover 10% of their journey. And this was only the start. Who knew what lay ahead of them? Especially after they entered the research base, unimaginable dangers could await them there. Everybody knew that the high elven aristocrats were sadists. The group could only counter whatever they'd left behind with an even more sadistic method, the holy light. This was all they could do now. They'd blast their way through these undead creatures using the powerful holy light so that they could enter the research base and destroy the altar before getting their hands on the gloomy dark. Lin Li was hell-bent on getting the gloomy dark this time. It was not just because the gloomy dark was very powerful. The gloomy dark held something more important to Lin Li. Coincidence after coincidence from the daylight square to the scar of death made Lin Li feel something. The 7 scattered pieces of the debris of the stars, and the immortal king whose name was the only thing he knew about him were both intricately linked to him. However, he could not say for sure what was the relationship between them. The only thing Lin Li knew was that the only way he could solve this mystery was to find the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars as well as the long-lost stars of fury. The moment this mythical weapon was in his hands once again would probably the moment everything was revealed. Light filled the cave when the holy light was taken out. It was like the sun was rising in the east, finally escaping the restraints of the dark and bringing warmth to the earth. The entire cave lit up suddenly as every corner and crevice of the cave was filled with the holy aura. All the undead creatures, be it the brimming skeletal warriors or the cowardly liches, melted like snow in the sun in front of the holy light. This is? Attila was stunned. He'd never thought that this unbelievably difficult fight could have been ended in such a way. After all, every skeletal warrior here was close to level 10, and the liches hiding in the black fog were all at least level 16. Even the 20 death knights would have a hard time against them. But they did not even last a second in the face of the holy light. With a sizzle, the world descended into silence. It was all like a dream. Perhaps even an archbishop of the brilliant shrine would not be able to create such a miracle in this battle. Attila was not the only one baffled. Besides Uchvalusi and Norfeller, who had witnessed the power of the holy light themselves, everyone was in a daze. Even the 20 death knights he had just conquered revealed looks of fear. And the one who was most surprised was no doubt Rena. As a paladin of the brilliant shrine, she knew better than anyone else what the ray of light meant. That was divine power even stronger than the great prophecy. Perhaps even Rosario would not have been able to cleanse all the undead creatures so easily like this young mage had done. Could it be? Rena suddenly thought of that meeting, that time when Rosario had used 3 great prophecy spells. Till now, the only thing I know is that he is in the breezy plains, and is around 20 years old. He is also a mage. That was what His Holiness Rosario had said. Could it be that this self-deprecating guy who spends all his time with undead creatures is the son of the holy light that His Holiness Rosario spoke of, the only incarnation of the holy light on earth? Rena stared at Lin Li for a long while, feeling incredulous. As they spent more time together, Rena gained a deeper understanding of this young mage that her teacher thought highly of. Honestly speaking, she had to admit that this fellow was not as infuriating as she'd thought. At least he did act like a true paladin when Black Cloud's town was attacked by the Crimson Python. Of course, that did not mean that Rena agreed with his ways. For example, she could not stand the fact that he had two undead creatures as servants. She had received the teachings of the Holy Light since she was young, and could not accept the fact that a human had two undead creatures serving him. Rena found it absolutely insane that a human with two undead creatures as servants was the son of the Holy Light that Rosario spoke of and the only incarnation of the Holy Light on earth. It was even recorded in the writings of the Brilliant Shrine. If this was what the incarnation of the Holy Light was, he was better off insane. But Rosario's words rang true in her ears, and so was the Holy Light she had just seen. She could not refute this. All of a sudden, the young and beautiful paladin was at a loss. After she debated with herself for some time, the decision she made was to ask her teacher in Los about this after she returned. The sudden appearance of the Holy Light cleansed the world in a moment, and there was no longer any trace of black fog before them, nor a sign of any undead creature. There was only a long and dark tunnel leading to God knew where. Without the hindrance posed by the undead creatures, the speed at which the advance party moved became faster, and they had already gone through the windy and complicated network of tunnels. Then, there was nothing but empty space in front of them. This had to be the mountain's belly. All they could see was a vast empty space as though they were looking at an endless plain. The walls surrounding them were shockingly smooth and glossy. There would be intricate and mysterious carvings on these smooth walls every dozen meters or so, just as though they held some mystical powers. Anyone would know that these walls were not shaped by nature. There was no way nature could have created something like that or leave such smooth and glossy walls. And the ones who did this were of course the high elven aristocrats 1,300 years ago. How grand! Lin Li looked from afar, and could not help but feel awed. Carvings aside, this huge granite wall would have taken a lot of manpower and time to polish until it was so smooth and glossy. The high elven aristocrats were sadists indeed. Such a strict sense of perfectionism could only be described as that. Even an eerie cave used to house a simply built research lab had to be done so perfectly. The altar is just ahead. Adelo stopped before the smooth walls. But be careful, my teacher said that the undead creatures here are different from the ones outside. Lin Li nodded his head. While there were no bones around, and no disgusting stench of decay, Lin Li felt an aura of danger in the air. The Holy Light in the Ring of Endless Storm was also going berserk, just like it had when it had first met the gloomy dark in the Well of the Sun. This feeling of impending danger made Lin Li tense up. His mental strength was pushed to its limit as the warlock's eyes continued to scan around for any suspicious signs. The 20 Death Knights summoned their shapeshifters again as they spread incredibly cautiously around the advance party, forming a defensive formation. Adelo's right hand remained in his pocket as he held tightly onto the teleportation scroll that could save his life. Nobody knew better than him how dangerous this seemingly quiet place was. Even his teacher Cheyenne had said that if he met any danger here, he could immediately use the teleportation scroll to escape. Almost everybody was tense as nobody knew what kind of dangers lay before them. The only thing they could do was to remain on guard so that they could react quickly once they met any danger. This tension continued for a long time until they saw a glimmer of light in the darkness. There is the altar. When he saw the light, Adelo's furrowed brows relaxed at last. After 2 grueling days and countless close fights, he had finally found the altar hidden in the mountains. Even though Adelo was a dignified person, he could not help expressing his joy and happiness. So much so that he forgot that he was in the perilous scar of death. Be careful. Lin Li's expression changed almost at the same time, for he heard a familiar sound. Just as Adelo quickened his steps to run towards the light, a strong wind started blowing in the air, and everybody felt as though they had been thrown into a pile of bones. The strong stench of decay the wind carried was like that of countless corpses piled together. My God, Adelo looked up in shock, and the look of happiness on his face froze. A large being swept past in the air, and its huge wings spread, covering everyone in its shadow. In his shock, Adelo seemed to have heard a long growl, and saw ice-blue flames fall from the sky. In a second, all he saw was a world of blue lights. Only when the icy blue flames fell from the sky did Adelo realize that it was a humorous wyrm. But it was all too late. The flame of a humorous wyrm was comparable to legendary magic in power, and once he was hit, he would crack instantly even if he was made of steel. All of this happened too quickly. Adelo had been lost in happiness, and had never thought that there would be a real humorous wyrm hidden in this dark. Moreover, this humorous wyrm was incredibly sinister, creeping up on them without a sound before attacking. This is it. As the icy blue flames fell, that was the only thought in Adelo's mind. Almost at the same time the icy blue flames fell on him, Adelo felt his body become light as though he was rammed by a running horse, and his body felt like it was shattering into pieces. Adelo saw black before his eyes, and a gush of blood rushed out from his throat. Before he could even throw up the blood from the impact, Adelo felt himself flying far away like a kite with broken strings. It was quite a fall, indeed, having been from a height of at least 17 meters. Even if it were a hardy high-ranking warrior in his place, he would not have fared much better, much less a physically weak mage like Adelo. Adelo felt his head spin from the fall, and saw lights dance before his eyes as though the world was spinning around him. When Adelo came back to his senses, the huge shadow in the sky was long gone. There were only ice shards lying on the ground as well as a crater of at least 10 meters it left behind. Adelo's mouth was wide open, but he could not make a sound. All of this was too overwhelming. If the ice flame had fallen on him instead, he would have been dead by now even if he was 10 times stronger than he was. Standing not far away from the crater was the young mage holding a magic staff. There was a light magical wave circling around him, and the crystal embedded on the top of his magic staff was glowing brightly. Adelo was an experienced archmage, after all, so even though he had just suffered a huge fall, he was still able to guess what had happened after seeing all of this. There was no doubt that he had the young mage to thank for the fall, but Lin Li's intention was not to hurt him, rather, it was to save him from the ice flame. Adelo was well aware that that was the best method to use in the situation earlier. The ice flame came at them too quickly for anybody to react to it, and even an archmage like him would not have been able to conjure up a shield when the ice flame fell upon them. The only thing he could do was hope that someone from the advance party would save him. Thankfully, the young mage had done just that. He had used power of repulse to save him from the ice flame. When Adelo thought about what circumstances the power of repulse had been conjured up in, he could not help breaking into cold sweat. This was all too strange. How was Lin Li able to hit him with the power of repulse in such circumstances? Was this Felix still human? Adelo did not dare imagine what kind of mentality and reflex was needed to achieve such a feat, much less casting magic at such a speed. How was Lin Li able to think of hitting him with the power of repulse in the face of this humorous wyrm? How did he finish the elemental sequencing as well as mana release all in a fraction of a second? That was far beyond what a human should be capable of. If Adelo really had to describe this feat, he could think of no better word than miraculous. Adelo had lost track of the number of times the word miraculous had come to mind after meeting Lin Li. And yet, Adelo would have never thought that this young mage who seemed to keep creating miracles in his eyes was now complaining as he stared at the disappearing figure of the humorous wyrm. Damn it, why am I so unlucky? Lin Li held the ether staff as he stared at the figure in the sky as he cursed at it in his mind. This was all because the warlock's eyes had captured a tiny detail. When the humorous wyrm swooped down from the sky, there was a slender figure on the back of the humorous wyrm. Even an idiot would know that it meant they were in huge trouble. How mediocre could this person be if they rode a humorous wyrm? Uchfalusi had looked so powerful back in Sire Town, but that was all because he managed to combine a sliver of soul fire many years ago, allowing him to somehow summon a humorous wyrm. While a humorous wyrm was not a true wyrm, it was given life by a true wyrm magical crystal. The ways of a wyrm were infused into its soul fire. How could a dragon which had fought the Titans and ruled the sky at one point, being the most powerful creature in Amril, allow just anyone to ride on its back? All of the ones in the history of Amril who were able to ride a wyrm were great men of their era, and many of them were still praised in folk songs today. The most well-known of them was the Night Dragon Knight, who had fought alongside Juresco during the Dark Ages. Lin Li finally understood why Cheyenne lost so badly in the Scar of Death even though he was very powerful. This was incredibly normal. Who else could say they would be able to go against a humorous wyrm and its writer unless they were as insanely powerful as Apophis? That was akin to going against two legendary beings alone. Cheyenne was lucky enough to merely be severely injured. If he was slightly unlucky, he would have lost his life instead. Unfortunately, it was now too late for regrets. Lin Li could clearly see that when he had frozen in his spot, the humorous wyrm had made a turn in the air, and the bone-chilling cold as well as the stench of decay was now approaching them. The slender guy on the back of the humorous wyrm had also stood up. Lin Li saw that he was wearing a black cloak, and was holding a long and thin magic staff. When he stood up on the back of the humorous wyrm, a strong magical wave suffused with death aura filled their surrounding. Another Lich. Lin Li felt his heart clench as he could feel that this Lich was way more powerful than Ujfalusi. Besides Lin Li, Ujfalusi and Norfeller had also felt the strong magical wave. Ujfalusi was especially sensitive to this magical wave filled with death aura as he had once been a Lich. Just as the humorous wyrm let out a long growl, Ujfalusi's face became pale with fear. Master, Ujfalusi opened his mouth, wanting to tell this the owner of their soul contract. Yeah, Ujfalusi, without waiting for the ex-Lich to speak, Lin Li cut him off as he knew what he was about to say. You don't have to tell me, I know that he's a Lich. Damn it, we're really in trouble. These bloody high elven nobles really had nothing better to do, coming up with this damned place and these two freaks. Lin Li cursed angrily as he took out the holy light from the ring of endless storm. However, once Lin Li did so, he could not make up his mind whether to channel mana into it, as this place was far too near the gloomy dark. If he activated the divine power in the holy light, there was a high chance that he might wake the gloomy dark as well. When the two forces of light and dark collided, it'd instantly bring disaster. By then, the whole advance party would be buried in the collapsed cave without needing these two freaks to do anything. But if he didn't, instant death was probably a better idea than having the dozen of people here fight a humorous wyrm and a Lich. It was a dead end both ways. Lin Li felt his head ache at the thought. The worst thing was that the humorous wyrm in the air did not intend to give him any time to ponder any further, as it spat another gust of ice flame at them just as he was speaking to Ujfalusi. Damn it, you've got guts. The burst of ice flame came at them too suddenly, and Lin Li did not have time to react. Hence, he could only put up an ice wall hurriedly while he cursed at the humorous wyrm in a frenzy. But it was merely a level 15 ice wall spell, and could not withstand the ice flame of the humorous wyrm at all. A second later, they could see the ice blue flame explode, followed by a crunching sound as many cracks appeared in the ice wall. Before anyone could comprehend what was going on, the thick wall of ice fell down with a loud boom. Thankfully, all of this had been within Lin Li's expectations. After he'd conjured up the ice wall, he continued to chant, and the dragon's eye atop his magic staff glowed brightly as walls of ice sprouted up like bamboo shoots after a rain. In a short period of time, Lin Li had conjured up 7 walls of ice. The humorous wyrm's ice flame destroyed them in an equally short amount of time, and the ground was soon covered in pieces of shattered ice as the whole place became a mess even though it had been spotless just moments ago. But, they did block off the ice flames at last. Norfeller, gravity spell. After saying that, Lin Li raised his head and chugged a bottle of multicolored potion. Yes. Vampires were naturally gifted in dark magic, and high-ranking vampires like Norfeller were especially talented at the gravity spell. As Norfeller started chanting in a deep and husky voice, a black light appeared around the humorous wyrm, and its flying speed decreased. How could a humorous wyrm with a wyrm magical crystal be tied down by a gravity spell? With a long growl, the large wings spread out in the sky, and a strong wind started blowing. Everyone felt a bone-chilling sensation, and the weaker ones on the team like Jonathan and Reggie immediately felt as though their blood was freezing up. Even the stronger ones like the level 17 warriors had to channel all their combat energy to withstand the sudden surge of cold. Lin Li was the only one who was not fazed by the cold. He'd already started chanting immediately after Norfeller used the gravity spell, and when the humorous wyrm spread its wings, Lin Li was finished with the last line of the spell. The dragon's eye glowed brightly, and a huge frost gun appeared. "I'll teach you to spit at me." The frost dragon gun one sliced through the air with a deafening noise, the projectile flying towards the humorous wyrm in the sky. The dragon gun was called so because it was a gun used to slay dragons. The weapons used by the Titans to fight against the wyrms were called dragon guns. The only difference was that the dragon guns used by the Titans were forged from lightning, and even a wyrm would not be able to escape an attack from the dragon gun unscathed. Meanwhile, the frost dragon gun used by Lin Li was created by generations of mages, who had taken inspiration from the only surviving dragon gun of the Titans. While it was far less powerful, it was particularly effective when used against large creatures, like the humorous wyrm in the sky now. Even though the humorous wyrm was quick to escape its restraints, it was still not quick enough to escape Lin Li's frost dragon gun, and just as it had spread its wings, the attack was already right before its eyes. In a split second, all they heard was a deafening noise before the meters-long frost dragon gun's attack exploded violently. The large amount of magical elements it contained was released in the explosion, causing an earthquake to occur in the cave. Even though the humorous wyrm's body was incredibly tough, it still suffered a big injury after being hit by a level 20 magic out of the blue. Shattered pieces of bones fell down like rain, followed by a long, pathetic whimper issued by the humorous wyrm. Norfeller's gravity spell could no longer hold down the enraged creature, and the huge figure swept past above their heads as it disappeared into the endless darkness. The frost dragon gun conjured with the help of the multicolored potion had allowed them to fend off the ferocious humorous wyrm for now, and they finally managed to catch their breath after having been suffocated by the cold. By then, even the very high-ranking warriors were fully convinced that if they wanted this mission to be a success, they could only rely on this young mage. He was able to fend off the powerful humorous wyrm with just a spell. Surely even a legendary mage was no better than that. He was able to fend off the powerful humorous wyrm with just a spell. Surely even a legendary mage was no better than that. However, Lin Li had no time to celebrate his victory, as he knew very well that even though the frost dragon gun was powerful, it was still not a true Titan dragon gun, after all. While he'd managed to injure the humorous wyrm earlier, that injury was far from lethal. Moreover, there was Lich, far stronger than Ujfalusi, standing on the back of the humorous wyrm. He was a true master of necromagic. If he was willing, all he had to do was spend some time to make the humorous wyrm as powerful as it was in its prime. The real fight had only just begun. After firing the frost dragon gun, Lin Li hurried back a few steps so that he was back under the protection of the Death Knights. Honestly speaking, the 20 Death Knights were not as powerful as he would have liked them to be. They were not real retribution knights, after all, and so were nowhere near the level of a humorous wyrm or a Lich in terms of magic or melee capability. However, Lin Li could not be bothered much, he only hoped that they'd be able to buy him enough time. Enough time to drink this potion. After retreating a few steps, Lin Li slowly reached into his pocket, and took out a sky-blue potion bottle. This sky-blue potion bottle was made from the dream crystal that Balba had given Lin Li during the inauguration ceremony, the life bottle that was coveted by every pharmacist. The life bottle was precious because any potion that was placed in it would be infused with some of the aura of the Tree of Life, which would increase the potency of the potion as well as purify it so that the potion could be taken continuously without any harmful effects on the body. Even Lin Li had to admit then that he was very lucky to have it. Lin Li had used the Black Lotus immediately after the inauguration ceremony, and spent an entire week coming up with an all-knowing potion. Honestly speaking, the name all-knowing sounded very tacky, but it had always been a legend amongst mages. Every mage knew that the effect of this all-knowing was that it'd allow the potential of the mage who drank it to skyrocket, raising their abilities to a shocking level. Moreover, this effect could allow one to cross realms from a magic shooter to an archmage, and from an archmage to a legendary realm mage. This upgrade was not to be belittled, as it was different from the effect that came along with the multicolored potion. The multicolored potion merely allowed the mage who consumed it to have unlimited mana as well as cast magic beyond their level for a short period of time, just like Lin Li had done earlier. He had been able to cast a level 21 Eternal Light spell with the help of the multicolored potion even though he was only a level 18 archmage. However, this was all attributed to the power of the multicolored potion, and Lin Li did not experience any increase in his abilities. He was still a level 18 archmage, and would not become a legendary mage just because he had taken the multicolored potion. Truth be told, the multicolored potion only pleased the eye of many mages. Even though it had great effects of allowing the user to have unlimited mana and cast magic beyond their level, one had to have the ability to enjoy these benefits. How could one hope to cast a legendary spell if they did not have mental strength powerful enough to withstand it? Even Lin Li, who had an immensely powerful mental strength, took 3 minutes before he finished chanting the Eternal Light spell. Truth be told, the multicolored potion only pleased the eye of many mages. Even though it had great effects of allowing the user to have unlimited mana and cast magic beyond their level, one had to have the ability to enjoy these benefits. How could one hope to cast a legendary spell if they did not have mental strength powerful enough to withstand it? Even Lin Li, who had an immensely powerful mental strength, took 3 minutes before he finished chanting the Eternal Light spell. If he had not had the help of Ujfalusi's Tide of Death to buy him some time, he would have been smashed into mush by the Death Knights. But the all-knowing potion was different. After taking that potion, Lin Li's abilities would experience a true increase. He'd stay at either level 19 or a level 20 for the full 1 hour of the potion's effect, and he'd have a complete grasp of that power due to the potion. As a true pharmaceutics guru himself, Lin Li was well aware what kind of effect the all-knowing potion would have on him given his current abilities. If he took a bottle of that potion, he could probably surpass the legendary realm. And not to forget, the potion was kept in the life bottle. After being purified and refined by the life bottle, the effect of the potion would reach a shocking level, and might even give him the power akin to level 21. What kind of concept was being at level 21? Well, think of Aldwin. Without a doubt, the all-knowing potion had to be one of the most powerful trump cards that Lin Li had. This was why Lin Li had used the Black Lotus and the life bottle, as well as many other rare and precious ingredients. To make this potion, it was so that he could have a trump card that would allow him to turn the tables in the most dire and dangerous of situations. This all-knowing potion was too precious, and Lin Li could not bear to use it even though he was surrounded by a large number of vampires and the 20 Death Knights earlier. He had preferred risking injury to perform a level 21 Eternal Light spell with the help of the multicolored potion. But now, Lin Li could only twist open the cap of the bottle and down the cooling liquid. He had no other choice. He was facing much too strong an enemy. Humorous wyrm aside, there was also a Lich much more powerful than Ujfalusi had been. This was basically sending him to his death. He was willing to bet his head that even Cheyenne did not meet with such a horrifyingly powerful opponent, or else he would not have just suffered heavy injuries. No matter how powerful Cheyenne might have been, he would meet his death if he was faced with a humorous wyrm and a Lich. As soon as the cooling liquid poured into his mouth, Lin Li felt as though the mana in him was boiling over. That was a strange feeling, just as though someone lit a fire within him, and he burst into flames. The mana in him was originally like a flowing river, but it had suddenly turned into a raging sea. When Lin Li opened his eyes again, the world suddenly became incredibly clear, and the endless darkness did not seem as indiscernible now. Lin Li was even able to clearly see the huge wings of the humorous wyrm in the sky and the Lich on its back holding a magic staff as he chanted a complicated spell. As the words came out of the Lich's mouth, the huge wound in the humorous wyrm's chest the frost gun had left was also healing at a speed he could see with his naked eyes. This was not there the effects of the potion ended. It was more of an indescribable feeling. At that moment, Lin Li even felt as though he had suddenly been enlightened. The complicated and profound theories of magic were now clear to him as though he had suddenly found the end of a string in a snarl. As long as he followed the string, he'd be able to unravel the whole thing. He suddenly had the answers to questions he had long had troubles with as well. In that instant, Lin Li felt as though the whole magic system was presented right before his eyes. While he and magic were still separate entities, it felt as though their positions had been switched. In the past, he was used to looking up at it, and no matter how he craned his neck, he could only manage to catch a glimpse of a small part of the whole magic system, but now, he was looking from above and could see everything beneath him clearly. Lin Li knew that this was the legendary realm. Nothing else besides the core magical mantras mattered to a mage who had reached the legendary realm. Everything, be it techniques or knowledge, was seen as replaceable, for the legendary realm itself represented the most thorough insight of things. Legendary mages paid no heed to the most profound of casting techniques and the most mysterious magical knowledge, as they could always do better than that if they so wished to. This was all because they were already standing at the peak of magic, and as they looked downwards, they would naturally be able to see everything clearly. Any magic they cast was able to demonstrate the most profound of casting techniques as well as the most mysterious of magical knowledge, and the only things that remained above them in the whole magic system were the core magical mantras. Once they were able to climb this peak, they'd enter the sanctuary realm that only existed in legends. And right now, Lin Li felt as though he was looking down from above. As Lin Li held the ether staff, he felt a strong burst of strength run through his body. Never had he felt so powerful, not even when he drank the elixir of the sages and was able to predict the future, nor when he had taken the multicolored potion and was able to conjure up dozens of pyroblasts anytime he wished. This was because this powerful strength was now held securely in his hands. The Lich was a master well-versed in necromagic indeed. In the blink of an eye, he had managed to repair the damage caused by the frost dragon gun. The humorous wyrm spread its wings again, and rushed with an angry cry towards the advance party at an alarming speed, thanks to necromagic. Before anyone had the time to react to it, the huge shadow had already been cast on everyone beneath. As the blue ice flames covered the ground, half of the Death Knights had fallen in a flash. It was not worth it at all to have Death Knights go against the humorous wyrm, as it was akin to having one's hands and feet tied in a fight while the other party was free to hit him as he wished. These 20 Death Knights were the fools with their hands tied now, as even though they had the powerful shapeshifters and their sharp frost blades, they were unable to bring even a bit of harm to the humorous wyrm. The only thing they could do was to use their pathetic dark magic to attack the humorous wyrm while they shielded Lin Li, who was absorbing the effects of the potion, with their bodies. Even a true legendary realm powerhouse would be no match for the humorous wyrm, much less the 20 Death Knights that were not truly in the legendary realm yet. While they looked as sturdy as walls of steel, they still collapsed under the attack of the humorous wyrm's ice flame. The weaker ones were even engulfed by the ice flame, and when the blue light dissipated, a few of the Death Knights were already lying on the floor as their soul fire quickly seeped out from cracks in their armor. What do we do? What do we do? Attila was worried sick. He had thought that the Frost Dragon gun was able to heavily injure the humorous wyrm, only for that damned humorous wyrm to so quickly return as good as new. What do we do? Can that mage Felix still hold up or not? The situation before their eyes was really at its worst, as the Death Knights that were supposed to protect that young mage were all falling one by one. The humorous wyrm had only breathed ice flames at them twice before half of them fell. The ones still standing were only holding on to scraps of armor, and perhaps would all be engulfed by the next breath full of ice flames. Besides the Death Knights, there were only a few people who could really be of help. Attila was one of them, the ex-Lich Falusi was one as well, and Norfeller, who was well versed in dark magic, was another. Even Rena, who had displayed impressive combat prowess before, was of no help now, as a judge paladin was helpless facing a flying humorous wyrm unless they had already reached the legendary realm. Flying was indeed the best advantage creatures like a dragon could have, as even the Titans, who were the strongest creatures physically in all history, were no match for the flying dragons, which was why the Titan's dragon gun was born. After countless tries, it had been proven that the first step to beating a dragon was to make it fall from the sky. Just like what Lin Li was doing now. After the ice flames had engulfed half of the Death Knights, Lin Li was finally done absorbing the potion. When he walked out from under the Death Knight's protection, holding the ether staff in his hand, he gave everyone a strange feeling when they saw him. Nothing had changed, but it felt like he was a whole new person. Even his two servants, Norfeller and Ujfalusi, who knew him the best, found him unfamiliar, as though they had never met him in their life. It was because this mage with the magic staff was really too powerful, so powerful he felt unfamiliar. If they thought that he had merely been pretending to be powerful when he used the eternal light spell after conducting a mysterious ritual, then he could only be truly powerful now. None of that power was fake, and even a fool could tell that all that strength came from him. It was just like a tiger shedding the sheepskin it had been hiding beneath, all claws and sharp teeth as the king of beasts. "Mr. Lich, your pet has been flying for so long. Doesn't it feel tired?" Lin Li looked up at the humorous wyrm diving towards him with an unusually calm expression. However, the magical wave around him was thrown into a sudden frenzy after he finished speaking. Everyone held their breath at seeing the scene before them, even Norfeller, who used to serve a high-elf aristocrat, and Ujfalusi, who had led a long life and occupied Sire Town for centuries, and even the only judge paladin of the Brilliant Shrine, Rena, as well Adalo, who had followed the legendary mage Cheyenne for decades. Everyone looked as if they had seen a ghost as they stared at the scene with a glazed expression and fear. This was something that only appeared in their dreams. Who had ever seen a young mage in his 20s make a flying humorous wyrm fall from the sky with just a spell? To explain, just as the humorous wyrm was spitting ice flames, the young mage started chanting. His chanting was not complicated, nor was it long and windy. It was as simple as a greeting, but in that instant, everyone felt a strong magical wave that made all of them tremble. The young mage's chant and the spell he cast gave everyone the illusion that the whole world seemed to be falling in that instant. But, they soon realized that it was not the world that was falling, but the flying humorous wyrm in the air. The huge figure grew increasingly bigger, and the humorous wyrm crashed onto the ground with a heavy thud. The world seemed to shake when the humorous wyrm fell down, dust flew everywhere, and thousands of bone fragments splattered in the dark. The sound of gravel falling, the stone walls cracking, and the humorous wyrm's growling all blended together, and transformed the quiet cave into a bustling city. Yet, the only sound in everyone's mind now was the chanting of the young mage, as it even covered the sound of the humorous wyrm crashing on the ground. That was the voice of a legendary mage. The world quieted down suddenly as everyone turned unanimously towards the young mage. Be it Norfeller, Rena, Adalo, or Jonathan, they all felt a sense of unfamiliarity from him. Was this legendary mage who held such terrifying power and was able to defeat the humorous wyrm easily really the polite young mage who always had a warm smile on his face? It felt as weird as seeing an ant turn around and suddenly become an elephant, a strange and abrupt process that felt surreal to everyone who had witnessed it. "Stand back." Just as everyone was staring wide-eyed, the young mage suddenly let out a shout before he disappeared into a shadow and retreated at a mind-numbing speed. A mage experienced great changes when they reached the legendary realm. This change was not only in terms of strength, but also in the way they cast a spell. This was because magic had become an innate ability for them at this point, and had fully integrated into the life of the mage, making it something as easy as breathing for them. Legendary realm mages did not even have to chant nor put in any mana to use spells like the Wind Blade or the Flaming Storm, as a gesture or even a thought sufficed for them to extinguish their enemy. Even strengthening magic like the Hastening Spell, Power Spell, or the Stoneskin Spell had completely solidified within them and became a part of them. A legendary mage was no less hardy than a level 15 or level 16 warrior, which was why Macklin and Aldwin were able to work in front of a furnace even though they were already so old. It was also because of this that Anduin was able to survive an accident when brewing a potion. Lin Li moved like a leopard. He was shockingly quick, and was already meters away before the dirt could rise in his wake. As Lin Li moved back, Norfeller and the rest reacted as well. Thankfully, the advance party was made up of all the elites of the mercenary corps, and even Jonathan, who was the weakest, was at level 14. Even though Lin Li had shouted abruptly, everyone reacted just as quickly. They were not much slower than Lin Li. "What's going on, Mage Felix?" Adalo was a mage, after all, and did not have any strengthening magic he could use. He only managed to catch up with the rest by quickly casting a hastening spell. However, when the archmage stopped next to Lin Li, he still looked somewhat doubtful. "The fight has just started," that was all Lin Li said. "What?" Adelo looked shocked before his expression changed quickly because he clearly saw the fallen humorous wyrm spread its huge wings and stretch its long body while it let out an earth-shattering roar. When he heard the growl, Adelo paled. He finally remembered that he was facing a true humorous wyrm, the most powerful of undead creatures, and one that carried a wyrm magical crystal at that. While falling from the sky was uncomfortable for it, that was all it felt, as that little setback did not deal it any damage at all. And as its enemy, he now had to be prepared to feel its wrath. Everything was just like Adelo thought. After the roar, ice flames spread everywhere, and even though its wings were restrained and it could not fly, they were enough to cause a strong gust of wind to blow in the spacious cave. In a second, all they could see was dust flying all around, and even an archmage like Adelo had to put up a 4-element shield to withstand it. The scariest thing was that the humorous wyrm started moving again. A loud thump accompanied every step the humorous wyrm took, and it sounded like mountains moving. Even though it moved slowly, every step it took covered at least a dozen meters, and even though 100 meters looked like a far enough distance, it was nothing more than 10 steps to the humorous wyrm. They were all still catching their breaths, but in the blink of an eye, they had to face the humorous wyrm's ice flames again. Adelo only now understood why the young mage said that the fight had only just begun. While restraining a humorous wyrm with magic seemed like a victory in itself, it was actually just giving them a chance to fight against the humorous wyrm. Adelo looked at the humorous wyrm pressing closer as he added silently, "A rather slim chance." The odds of winning were low given their current situation. The humorous wyrm was too strong physically, only the Retribution Knight could compare to it amongst all undead creatures. Once it exploded in anger, the consequences would be unimaginable. And everyone was stuck in a cave too. While it looked spacious, there was a limit to the space, and given the distance the humorous wyrm could cover with a step, escaping would only turn this into a game of catch. Adelo racked his brains, and realized that he had to admit that they could only rely on this mage Felik. He only hoped that this young mage could continue creating miracles like in the previous fights. Unfortunately, Adelo did not know that while he was putting all his hopes on Lin Li was silently groaning. It was because he could feel that the Lich was about to strike. The magical wave coming off the Lich was boiling with anger, and even though Lin Li had legendary realm strength now, he still had to concentrate all his attention on going against the Lich. Hence, Lin Li did not even spare the humorous wyrm another glance, as he knew that the Lich was behind everything. Exterminating the Lich was the only option if he wanted to resolve this. The same black cloaks, and the same powerful strength. When the humorous wyrm neared the advance party, the two legendary powerhouses also made their first contact as the fight of their lives was starting. On one side was a master of necromagic who had lived for an eternity, while the other was a talented mage who held terrifying power because of the all-knowing potion. The fight between them was bound to create an explosion of sparks like meteors hitting Earth. The two of them moved at the same time. The Lich greeted Lin Li with a bone spear, and Lin Li returned the greeting with a wall of ice, which turned into many icicles after shattering. After having legendary strength, the way Lin Li used icicles also became different. He'd had to conjure them with magic before, and even though he had incredibly powerful mental strength, there would have been a delay nonetheless, but now, with the all-knowing potion, he could skip the process of conjuring them with magic as using the icicles had become an innate ability for him. All he had to do was think of it, and the water magical element would take on any shape he wished, forming dense crowds of icicles. If Lin Li was going against an archmage now, the thousands of icicles would kill him on the spot, as no matter how strong a 4-element shield was, there was no way it could hold up against thousands of icicles at once. Unfortunately, Lin Li was going against a Lich now, one that had already reached the legendary realm, and could ride a humorous wyrm. The Lich only used one spell to block the attack of the icicles. In a flash, all everyone heard was a boom, before a wall made of bones shattered between the Lich and Lin Li. This was a level 15 death revival, an unpopular necromagic spell, which made use of death aura to create corpses. Necromancers rarely used it as necromagic was not too adept in the process of creating, and even creating corpses would require way too much mana. Moreover, these corpses created from death aura were not very powerful, and even though they were created by a level 15 spell, they could easily be wiped out by normal level 10 fighters. However, when these corpses appeared under one's feet, they still made people break out in cold sweat, even a legendary mage. Lin Li did break out in cold sweat when he discovered the corpses beneath his feet. Retreat, quick! There was another use for corpses summoned by necromancers in fights, which was to cause explosions. While the level 14 corpse explosion was not of a high level, it was scarily powerful, especially when executed by a level 20 Lich. This was because the scale of the explosion depended on the number of corpses. The more there were, the bigger the explosion. The corpse explosion back at Black Hills town almost blew up the whole inn. One would be a fool not to run away if the level 20 Lich used a corpse explosion right now. Lin Li had actually discovered the corpses in time as they were only just appearing, and had yet to surround the advance party. If the Lich were to use the corpse explosion now, it would only be the few ones that had already surfaced exploding, which would not be very powerful, as the ground would act as a buffer for the explosion from those that were still buried underground. The Lich would have to wait a moment for all the corpses to surface if he wanted the corpse explosion to reach its full potential. This was provided that the Lich was willing to wait, as even a few seconds would suffice for the whole advance party to retreat to a safe distance. Everyone's reflexes had become incredibly quick after having spent the past few days fighting in the Scar of Death. All of them, the ones he had brought from the Tower of Dusk, Adalo and his men, and even Reggie and the rest, were very alert to their surroundings. Shortly after the warning echoed, they all sensed that there was impending danger, and managed to evacuate to a safe distance in just a split second. But then, the humorous wyrm turned around. Since the fight between the two legendary mages had started, the humorous wyrm was no longer under the Lich's control, and because its wings were still restrained by Lin Li's magic, flying was no longer an option as well. Hence, the dozen or so people in the advance party as well as the remaining Death Knights were able to hold it off for a while. But now that the advance party was running for their lives, the remaining Death Knights were unable to handle the humorous wyrm alone. Thus, the humorous wyrm suddenly turned around, and its long whip-like tail swept over abruptly. In that second, everyone heard a low sound breaking through the silence. The humorous wyrm was dozens of meters long, and its tail made up half of that length. Everyone only saw a shadow sweep by when that low sound was heard, and the cave suddenly started shaking with a booming noise. Bloody hell, all Lin Li saw before his eyes was darkness. The humorous wyrm's tail had shattered the smooth walls of the cave, causing debris to fly everywhere. Due to the strength of the humorous wyrm, this debris flew like cannonballs, and even the incredibly hardy Death Knights were forced to take cover. But the moment that happened, a problem arose. Without the Death Knights tying it down, the humorous wyrm regained its freedom, and it spread its wings as its huge body swooped over like an attacking hawk, moving dozens of meters towards them in just the blink of an eye. Then, another low sound was heard. Oh, no! Even Lin Li paled at that. If the walls of the cave were destroyed by one sweep of the humorous wyrm's tail, how was the advance party supposed to survive that? It would be a miracle if even half of them made it out alive. Luckily, Adalo reacted quickly. Just as the sound was heard, he had already broken the scroll in his hands, and a golden light appeared, enshrouding everyone. What a waste of a divine prevention scroll. Lin Li immediately saw that it was a divine prevention scroll from the Brilliance Shrine. That was level 18 theurgy, and was able to shield the user against one attack from a sword sage. It was a priceless treasure, and even paladins in the Brilliance Shrine were given only a small number thereof. If outsiders wished to get their hands on it, they would have to use very unusual means. But this precious scroll was misused by Adalo. There were many other ways they could deal with an attack from the humorous wyrm's tail, and it was unnecessary to resort to wasting the precious divine prevention scroll. This was something that could not even be bought with money, and when it occasionally appeared in the black market, it would be sold for close to 1,000,000 gold coins. But that was not the worst part, as the disadvantage that lay in using the divine prevention scroll was that it formed a shield of divine energy, which would also limit the movement of the user while protecting them. In other words, everyone was forced to remain in their spot for at least 5 seconds after the divine prevention scroll had been used. In other circumstances, 5 seconds would not have been much, but now, it could force them to take a passive stance. Just as Lin Li was silently worrying, the long tail of the humorous wyrm directly struck the golden light, causing an explosion of lights. Sparks flew everywhere, making this eerie place light up as brightly as fireworks in the night sky would. The dozen or so people of the advance party narrowly escaped death thanks to the divine prevention scroll, and all held grateful expressions, thankful that Adalo had used it quickly enough. All except Lin Li, and truth was, Lin Li was right. After the golden light dissipated, hundreds of corpses surfaced from the ground. Moreover, these hundreds of decaying corpses were coming at them from every direction. Lin Li felt his hair stand on ends at the sight. God knew how scary it'd be if hundreds of corpses exploded at once. Lin Li knew very well that he could not allow the Lich to use the corpse explosion. Even if he was capable of protecting himself, the rest would surely perish. He could not care less now. He had already retreated out of the area using the power of flight, but he paused in midair as he concentrated all of his mental strength before speeding towards the area with the most corpses, chanting quickly at the same time. It was an ice wall spell. After mastering level 18 magic, Lin Li had been using it quite often as he found it more sturdy than the 4-element shields. Besides neutralizing most magical attacks, it could also block physical attacks, which made it more practical than the 4-element shields. Of course, it was merely practical. He would be dreaming if he thought that an ice wall spell would be able to shield them against the explosion of hundreds of corpses. Even though Lin Li now had the ability of a legendary mage, and was able to conjure 20 ice walls at once, there was no way that would be enough to resist the terrifying corpse explosion. Luckily, it was not Lin Li's aim to completely neutralize the corpse explosion. All he wanted was to buy some time to stop the Lich from casting his spells. The speed at which he moved, thanks to the power of flight, was astonishing indeed as he moved as quickly as lightning. In a flash, he had flown into the center of the corpses. At the same time, ice walls appeared everywhere, and shielded the advance party reliably. Just as these ice walls appeared, the Lich in the sky had raised his magic staff, and the corpse nearest to these ice walls exploded with a booming noise. What more, this explosion spread like wildfire, and continued endlessly. In a short span of time, nearly a dozen corpses exploded, and this was done by the level 20 Lich too. The scale of this explosion was worlds apart from what the necromancer did back in Black Hills town. A hole had appeared in the half-a-meter thick ice wall in a split second, and as sounds of explosion continued endlessly, this hole grew bigger. This is too scary. No matter how brave he was, Adalo was still scared half to death as he heard the loud sounds of explosions from where he stood at the center of the corpse explosion. Shut up. Lin Li had his hands tied with continuously reinforcing the ice walls. At the same time, he channeled mana into the ether staff like his life depended on it so as to activate the dragon's eye at the tip. He had no time at all to care about how scared Adalo was. As Lin Li channeled mana into it, the dragon's eye began glowing brighter and brighter. Finally, faint yellow light seeped through the thick walls of ice, and was reflected off the glossy walls of the cave. The Lich raised his magic staff as well, and a thick death aura started spreading from the black crystal at the tip of the magic staff. More and more corpses appeared from the ground, and exploded right before the ice walls. This was the impressive thing about legendary magic. He was executing a level 15 death revival and a level 14 corpse explosion at the same time flawlessly. While they were both guided magic, there was no need for elemental sequencing during the process of guiding it. Besides that, they were not that much different from average magic. They still required the control of magical elements and the channeling of mana, and any mistake in that process would immediately result in the bite of mana. Neither of these spells was high in level, as one was level 14, and the other was level 15. This might seem like nothing much to others, seeing as these were merely magic shooter level spells, which were seemingly incomparable to level 20 magic of the legendary realm. However, people who truly understood magic would know that the Lich had demonstrated casting techniques of the highest level, for even amongst legendary mages, only the most experienced and the most powerful would be able to pull off such an impossible feat. Using the most profound of casting techniques would naturally result in the most terrifying effect. The death revival continued to produce corpses by gathering death aura, and the corpse explosion continued to cause explosion after explosion. This meant that as long as the Lich was continuously guiding the spells, this attack would never cease, and even walls of steel would be blown up by it. Truth was, that was the case. Corpses continued to appear everywhere amidst the earth-shattering explosions. There were now close to 300 corpses, even though there had previously been less than 100 of them. These creatures created from death aura continued to grow in numbers, and inched closer and closer to 4 walls of ice. In the end, the whole place was densely covered by corpses. If they completely surrounded the 4 ice walls, perhaps even Lin Li would not be able to withstand the effects of the last corpse explosion, much less the people of the advance party. In the end, it was an expletive that ended all of this. For frack's sake, are you done? As the expletive left Lin Li's mouth, a faint yellow light enshrouded the Lich as the arcane wall spell within the dragon's eye was released at last. As the faint yellow light flashed, the Lich's chanting ended abruptly, and the endless sounds of explosions suddenly stopped. The ground beneath their feet did not rumble anymore, and the stinky corpses collapsed before Lin Li's feet as though they were controlled by an unknown force at the same time. Then, they heard a crunching noise as ice walls that had held up against over 30 corpse explosions finally fulfilled their last mission after the arcane wall was released. Cracks appeared in the walls following the crunching noises, and they grew into deep gashes in the blink of an eye. When these cracks intersected with each other, the ice walls finally gave in to the pressure, and fell down with a loud boom. Alright, I take back my words. This bastard isn't more troublesome than Ujfalusi. Lin Li mopped the cold sweat on his forehead as he walked out from amongst the shattered pieces of ice. Bloody hell, he's so much more than just troublesome. Ujfalusi had been way too predictable compared to this Lich, as all the necromagic he used right from the first tide of death to the humorous wyrm failed to pose much of a problem to Lin Li. While the tide of death was a level 20 magic, the undead creatures it had summoned were too dumb, and could easily be dealt with using 1,000 miles of ice. The humorous wyrm was slightly more impressive, but unfortunately for him, Lin Li had the holy light with him, and managed to blow up the humorous wyrm with just a light blow, even bringing down the humorous domain with it. In the end, even the Lich himself was forced to make a soul contract with a human. This Lich was different, however. Lin Li was willing to bet his head that this bastard had received the most proper kind of education in magic possible. There were way too many mages in Amril. Even Anduin, who held an important position in the Supreme Council, could only describe their number as hundreds of thousands when he talked with Lin Li. However, hardly 1,000th of them had seen a legendary mage in person, much less witness a fight between 2 legendary mages. This was not an exaggeration, as most mages in Amril did not know how legendary mages dueled. They were not much different from an average person in that aspect. Many mages thought that a fight between legendary mages would be as grand as the battles in historical records, where they hurled legendary-level magic at each other, and that the elemental power would be enough to shatter the ground. Hence, they were thought to only use archmage-level magic sparingly as an accent to the fight. The truth was the opposite, however, as legendary mages rarely used legendary-level magic when they fought each other, and even if they did, it was often for other reasons. They would use them to distract their opponent or to pressurize them. These were merely tactics, however, and did not determine if they would win in the fight. They still relied on level 18 and level 19 magic to truly win. This was because when a mage entered the legendary realm, their understanding of magic also reached new heights. They started to realize that they could simplify all the complicated theories, and began to take on a more straightforward approach towards magic. However, this did not mean that their approach became crude or superficial. as it was a blend of their profound understanding of complicated techniques as well as the most essential of core magical mantras, thus resulting in a new style of magic. This style of magic could never be replicated, as it was something that developed naturally after one reached the legendary realm. Just like Lin Li now. Even though he had the help of the all-knowing potion, as soon as he had the strength of the legendary realm, he adopted such a style almost immediately. If the mages from the Daylight Square were witnessing this, they would find it hard to believe that this young mage who cast spells without an additional syllable in his chanting or an additional movement in his gestures was the same young talent who had demonstrated various fancy techniques of casting spells back in the Daylight Square. Lin Li was like a different person now, as there was no trace of the archmage from the Daylight Square on him now. Each of his spells was filled with a beautiful simplicity, and nobody would think he was a young mage only in his 20s based on the way he cast spells. The way he simplified his techniques effectively was something that one would see once in a while observing mages who had studied magic for decades. The Lich that rode the humorous wyrm was like that too. He had always hidden in the Scar of Death, and once fought the legendary mage Cheyenne, resulting in both suffering heavy injuries. In this fight, he, too, demonstrated his great understanding of magic. The thousands icicles had just melted when the Lich chanted one line, and green toxic fumes started spreading nearby. They seemed to have a life of their own, as even though the cave was spacious, the fumes did not spread everywhere, but stayed concentrated in one spot, looking from afar like a moving snake. This was a level 15 withered fog, one of the most infuriating necromagic of all, as it had poisoned any living person who came in contact with it. If one did not have at least theurgy of level 15 and above or a potion that could save their life, they'd be dead in seconds. The worst thing was that the withered fog was made up of death aura, which was naturally sensitive to the scent of life. Hence, it'd search for living creatures upon release and cling to them relentlessly. As soon as the withered fog was released, almost half of whatever they could see was now covered in it, as there were patches of green everywhere. This bastard, Lin Li felt a headache coming when he saw the green fumes, as even though it could not hurt a legendary round powerhouse, it could deal damage to others. That was the infuriating part of the spell, as even though it was not very powerful, it was horribly clingy, and required a long time to neutralize. Hence, he had no choice but to be wary of it. Thankfully, he had reached the legendary realm with the help of the all-knowing potion. Lin Li cursed angrily in his mind as he quickly started chanting a level 20 Great Purge spell. Aldwin had used it back in the Daylight Square to get rid of the Bloodvine spell that Gryffindor was trapped in. On some levels, the Great Purge spell was like the Eternal Light spell, but it was easier to execute and less powerful. However, they were both used to deal with evil creatures. Be it undead creatures or demons, they would all be exterminated by the light of the Great Purge spell. The withered fog was no exception. Lin Li chanted very quickly. Before the green fumes even spread out completely, the light from the Great Purge spell already shone everywhere, as the whole place was lit up by the blinding rays of light. Once the whole place shone brightly, the green fumes also disappeared like dust in the rain as they dissolved into the light. That's not right. For some reason, however, Lin Li did not feel settled at all after the withered fog dissipated, for he felt his heart clench as though there was an impending danger. Then, Lin Li smelled a stench of decay. Frack! Lin Li lowered his head unconsciously, and immediately cursed as he saw that the ground beneath his feet had loosened after the withered fog disappeared. There was even a decayed arm sticking out of it. It was reaching for his right foot. Only the most proper education in magic possible would produce a clingy bastard of such caliber. This Lich and Ujfalusi were both level 20 necromancers, and were both able to summon a humorous wyrm, yet they were worlds apart in terms of combat skills. While Ujfalusi had once ruled over the ruins of Sire Town, he was nothing more than a harmless lamb compared to this clingy bastard. There was no way to compare them at all. This bastard was awfully difficult to deal with, because while he was skilled in necromagic, he did not use any summoning spells, which were the most effective spells necromagic had to offer. Even though he conjured hundreds of corpses using death aura, they were only meant for the last corpse explosion. There was only one reason why a necromancer did not summon undead creatures. It meant that he had far more powerful tricks up his sleeve. that was what happened indeed. The Lich had only used 3 level 15 spells, but they formed a flawless trap, one that made the advance party inch closer and closer to their death. If Lin Li had not used the dragon's eye at the very last minute, there would be less than 3 people from the advance party still alive now. Even the usually calm Lin Li could not help but shudder as he recalled the earlier events carefully. What would happen if he had not taken the all-knowing potion? What if he did not have the dragon's eye? What if he had been a tad too slow in channeling his mana? Many what-ifs appeared in his mind. If any of these what-ifs became a reality, there would be unimaginable consequences. Luckily, Lin Li celebrated internally while he sized up the Lich with a strange look. For some reason, Lin Li found this Lich's power a bit strange, but did not know what was strange about it, either. Yet, it felt somewhat familiar to him. What's with this bastard? Lin Li racked his brains, but could not think of any reason behind this feeling. Hence, even when he got the upper hand using the arcane wall and the Lich was experiencing the bite of mana for the time being, Lin Li did not take the chance to nail his victory. Instead, he stood there with a doubtful look as he pondered this question. Strictly speaking, this was a mistake. Duels between legendary mages were of a different caliber, and opportunities came and went in such duels. If Lin Li continued his attacks after using the arcane wall, he would definitely get the upper hand in no time, but unfortunately, Lin Li had foregone this rare chance because he was dumbfounded by this strange feeling. He could not blame anyone for that. The bite of mana caused by having his magic being interrupted was nothing to a true Lich, and just as Lin Li hesitated for a while, the Lich had already brushed off the effects of the bite of mana, and chanted in his hoarse voice, to summon numerous bone spears. Damn it, I'm such a fool. As the sound of the bone spears wheezing through the air reached his ears, Lin Li immediately came to his senses, and realized that his previous hesitation had caused his loss of a rare opportunity. But Lin Li was different from when he just arrived in Amril. He had experienced many life-threatening fights from the Sunset Mountains to the breezy plains, and had just as much experience in fights as those the likes of Anduin. Even though he was kicking himself for his mistake, it only lasted a second before he immediately calmed down as he devoted all his concentration to the resuming duel. The fight had only just started as they were merely testing the waters in their previous exchanges. Both Lin Li and the Lich had gotten a rough idea about the other from the previous exchanges, and now they moved without hesitation as the strength of the legendary realm was truly unleashed, causing a crazy wave of magic to break out in the cave. Now that the fight had reached this stage, there was no room for luck. They could only depend on their abilities to win, hence, both Lin Li and the Lich brushed away any thought of winning by chance, and completely unleashed everything they were capable of. Amidst the endless chanting and the torrential magical waves, there were only 2 figures moving at lightning speed in the spacious mid-mountain area. The both of them moved from the ground to the air and back to the ground again using the power of flight, moving as fast as lightning as they perfectly showcased the capabilities of the legendary realm. Some rapid chanting could be heard between most of the instantaneous magic they used, and the momentum of the duel was unimaginably fast for most. The constantly changing gestures, magical waves on the brink of exploding, and mental strength that was being pushed beyond limits added a tinge of craziness to the fight, but in the midst of this craziness, there was also a sense of discipline and precision that left the onlookers in awe. Should one be watching the duel at this moment, they'd realize that while this human and Lich were constantly in a trance-like state as they cast spell after spell, every step was carried out flawlessly as every chant and every gesture they made looked like they would not be out of place in a magical textbook. They were like 2 machines, operating at incredibly high speed but with impeccable precision. Attila was truly stunned now. As he was a level 17 archmage, nobody in the advance party knew better than him that this was truly a fight of its own caliber. Not many mages had an opportunity to witness for themselves something as exciting. Attila stared at the 2 lightning-like figures greedily as he paid close attention to every gesture they made and every spell they uttered. He was well aware that being able to witness such a fight would be the greatest fortune of his lifetime. Every gesture and every chant in this duel encompassed the lifetime experience and accomplishments of both of these legendary powerhouses, and would allow any mage with the opportunity to witness this to save themselves from many wrong turns during their journey through magic. He was entirely engrossed in his happiness as he had thought that plain old him was lucky enough to have a legendary mage as his teacher, but had resigned himself to the fact that he'd probably remain at the peak of level 17 all his life. It would depend on his luck to reach level 18, or even level 19. Yet, to think that he would be so lucky as to witness the fight between two legendary mages in the Scar of Death. This was fortune beyond the wildest dreams for an archmage stuck at a bottleneck. Adalo was convinced that he would definitely be able to reach level 18 within the next 3 years with this alone. Adalo did not know whether to laugh or cry at this windfall of his. Never had he guessed that he would be the one to profit the most from this fight. Of course, little did he know that someone else had profited more from this. That someone was Lin Li without any question. Lin Li had had the opportunity to train with a legendary mage a long time ago, as old Grimm had volunteered to practice with him at the Guild of Magic in Gerosis to express his apology. Lin Li had only been level 9 then, and was able to advance quickly to become a level 10 magic shooter thanks to old Grimm. However, old Grimm had forcefully restrained his strength back then, and even though he still had experience at the legendary level, his strength was only less than level 15. And he focused more on giving Lin Li pointers during the training, which had been very proper. Moreover, Lin Li had not even been a magic shooter then, and his understanding of magic was incredibly superficial. While he'd had a legendary mage to train with him, there was still a limit to how much he could learn from it. But, it was all different now. He now had the strength of the legendary realm thanks to the all-knowing potion, and was now dueling a Lich who had received most proper magical education, directly from the High Elves themselves. Adding on to that, he had had 1,300 years to practice. In terms of their understanding of magic, he was most likely well above the level of old Grimm back then. There was no limit to how much Lin Li would learn from experiencing a life-and-death fight against such an opponent. Lin Li still felt a little uneasy at first. He clearly had the strength of the legendary realm now, but he was unable to fully utilize it. It was like he was a starving sword sage who, although he had skills and combat energy of the highest level, was unable to fully demonstrate his capabilities due to being weak. But as time passed and their fight became intense, Lin Li started to shake off this uneasy feeling as he wielded the strength of the legendary realm with increasing ease. It was like this strength had completely infused within his blood now. As he wielded the strength of the legendary realm with increasing ease, Lin Li began to sink into an obsessive state as every chant and every gesture taught him something new, even combining with the core magical mantras in his head and forming a new magic system unique to Lin Li. Lin Li's abilities experienced a shocking growth in that time. While many required a lifetime to go from level 18 to level 19, Lin Li had only used half an hour in this peculiar circumstance. When Lin Li felt himself reaching level 19, he even stopped casting spells for a moment as he inhaled the air deeply. This was because Lin Li knew that he was not far away from the legendary realm. The effect of the all-knowing potion only lasted an hour. After the effect vanished, so would the potential it ignited. This meant that after an hour passed, Lin Li would be at the peak of level 18 again. However, Lin Li did not find this to be a pity, as he knew that it would not be long before he obtained similarly terrifying strength again. There was a devastating gap between a level 19 archmage and a level 20 legendary mage, and while there had been many magical talents in the history of Amril who had become a level 19 archmage at a young age, many of them had never set foot into the legendary realm their whole life. This gap had once caused great devastation to many mages. But to Lin Li, this gap was not all that big. Lin Li had already wielded the strength of the legendary realm twice with the multicolored potion and the all-knowing potion. The once unfamiliar legendary realm was now becoming clear before his eyes. This was not too different from Ujfalusi's case, even though this ex-Lich's humorous domain was destroyed and he had fallen from the legendary realm, he'd be able to return to his original level in a short period of time. This was just like walking the same path twice. One would already know of any impending danger, and would be able to avoid taking the wrong turn. All they had to do was to follow along this familiar path until they reached the end of it. Of course, this was all provided they could leave the Scar of Death alive. But, Lin Li believed that time actually was not far away. That was because at the same time he was becoming familiar with the strength of the legendary realm, he also found the answer to another question that had been bugging him. He had found the Lich's strength strange, because that strength was not coming from the Lich himself. Lin Li had not realized it at first, but as the duel became more and more intense, Lin Li began to find it strange. This duel had become impossibly fast, and most of the instantaneous magic they used was at least level 15. What kind of concept was that? Using a level 15 magic instantaneously a couple of times would probably completely drain an archmage of his mana. Only a true legendary powerhouse would be able to keep up with such expenditure. However, even a legendary powerhouse would suffer from lethargy after using instantaneous level 15 magic for an extended period of time. And yet, this human and Lich seemed to become more and more energetic, with no sign of mana exhaustion at all. There was no wonder why Lin Li could keep up with this, as he was different from anybody in this world, after all. Even Anduin had been envious of his seemingly endless reserve of mana. But what about this Lich? How could he withstand this expenditure? Was he like Lin Li, and had come from another world? As this suspicion appeared, Lin Li started noticing the changes in the Lich's mana, and soon realized that the flow of his mana was strange. Mages' mana usually came from within themselves, and when they used their mental strength, it'd form a unique magical wave. But this Lich was different. When he used his mental strength to cast spells, there indeed was a strong magical wave, but the Lich was not at the center of it, rather, it was from the endless darkness. The altar. A thought appeared in Lin Li's mind. Indeed, it had to be the altar, or this Lich would not be so strange. It was as though he had dozens of magical crystals on him as he never seemed exhausted. If the Lich's source of mana was the altar, it would make sense as the source of mana of the altar was one of the 7 debris of the stars, the gloomy dark. It was dark force in its purest form, and would definitely suffice to fuel a level 20 Lich comfortably. This sudden discovery made Lin Li ecstatic. If the Lich's strength really came from the gloomy dark, it would be all too easy to get rid of him. The fight between the two legendary mages was red-hot now. Magical runes covered the space, and made the cave shine as bright as day. Magical elements were boiling over everywhere, and it even felt as though time itself would tear in half. Countless spells raged like torrential waves threatening to destroy the world as frost and flames filled up their sight. Chunks of stone were sliced off from the walls surrounding them, while the ground shook beneath their feet, and shattered pieces of stone fell on them from the sky. No matter where they looked, it felt as though doomsday was coming. The intensity of this fight had exceeded everyone's imagination, even Lin Li's. Even Lin Li had not thought that a fight between two legendary mages would be so scary. It was like a scary vortex that was constantly pulling him into the dark. In order to resist its pull, he was exerting all the strength he had in the legendary realm. There was no room for mistakes in such fights, as even a mage who had reached the legendary realm could lose their life from an instance of bite of mana. The Lich and human in the duel were both powerful individuals standing at the peak of magic, and the pace of their duel was enough to send any other mage reeling. With just a simple gesture, they could cast over 10 spells, and the duel took a turn in various directions in every moment. Everything, from attacking or defending, chanting or casting instant spells, how they should allocate their mana or go about the elemental sequencing, how their opponent would react to what they did and what they should do in return, had to be considered in a split second before they had to make a decision. However, despite being in such a nerve-wracking duel, Lin Li found himself unusually calm. Lin Li found himself in a miraculous state as though everything around him had been slowed down by 1,000 times. Every gesture, every chant, and even the most minute change in magical waves were presented to him in an incredibly clear manner. It was especially so after he detected the strange occurrence. He was right, the source of the Lich's mana was the altar indeed. It was as though there was an invisible channel that continuously pumped mana into the Lich's body, thus giving him the ability to rival Lin Li's insane amount of mana. In order to get rid of this Lich, he would naturally have to cut off this channel. Holy light? Lin Li hesitated. If he wanted to cut off this channel, his best bet would be to use the holy light, as it was the only thing in the world that could fend off the gloomy dark. But, if he chose to do that, it would mean putting himself in danger, as even a legendary mage might not be able to withstand the force of light and darkness colliding. He would have at most a 20% chance of surviving the near-fatal explosion. Meanwhile, the people from the advance party would most probably perish along with the Lich. Lin Li brushed this idea away quickly, as it was a one-way ticket to hell. He would never do that unless he was truly left with no other option. It was one thing for Adelo and the rest to die, but what about those from the Tower of Dusk? Norfeller and Edgefalusi were his most capable men, and had always been loyal to him, so how could he sacrifice them just like that? And then there was Rena, the only judge paladin from the Brilliant Shrine and Archbishop Inglo's cherished disciple. If he sacrificed her too, Unlos and Rosario would have his head, but what could he do if the holy light was not an option? The flying bone spears and toxic fumes, as well as the suffocating magical waves in the cave, weighed down on him. While Lin Li was still capable of holding his ground, the endless necromagic still felt like a python that was coiling tighter and tighter around him. What do I do? What do I do? Lin Li was dripping with sweat as the duel was taking an unfavorable turn for him. With the power borrowed from the gloomy dark, the tireless Lich was beginning to get the upper hand in the fight. If Lin Li still did not make a decision, he would be dragged into the abyss of failure. Even if he was willing to use the holy light, then, there was no way he could kill the Lich that already held the fate of the duel in his hands. Oh, right. Just as the fight was taking a bad turn for him, a thought flashed through his mind. The crystal. That's right, that crystal. That crystal that fed on shapeshifters and vampires and almost got him killed. Even though Lin Li was still unsure what purpose the crystal served, he remembered very clearly that the crystal had shown a peculiar ability back in the Shadow Glen. It was able to devour death aura, even the death aura that was emitted when the undead lords were controlling the undead creatures. If it is used to devour the power of the gloomy dark. That sounded like an absolutely bewildering idea, but Lin Li did not hesitate to reach into the ring of endless storm, as he was left with no other choice. Unless he wished to perish with everyone by using the holy light, this bewildering idea was the only one he had. Even though the crystal had been lying around in the ring of endless storm for over half a year, it still looked no different from before. The moment he grabbed it, Lin Li immediately felt a chill run through him. It was as though he was not holding onto a crystal, but a piece of ice that had been frozen for over 1,000 years. I knew it. Just as the crystal was exposed to the air, Lin Li knew that he was right, as he could clearly feel a strange distortion in the surrounding magical waves. This crystal could devour the power of the gloomy dark indeed. While this was not sufficient to cut off the channel instantly, it was enough for Lin Li, as all he needed now was an opportunity to lay down a trap using the crystal so that he could lure the Lich into it. Lin Li held the crystal tightly in his hands, seemingly unbothered by the chill, as he chanted rapidly to form a powerful high-level magic. Even the level 18 ice blast had been shortened down by him into an instantaneous magic. In a split second, the entire cave was filled with the contrasting forces of the ice blast and the flame energy, and even the green toxic fumes that covered the air were now wiped out. This was an explosive attack with no warning sign at all. It appeared completely out of the blue. Even the Lich that had lived for over 1,300 years was taken aback and lost his bearings in the face of such an attack. The chilly wind and the shattered pieces of ice took the shape of an ice blast wyrm in the sky as it raced towards the Lich with an ear-shattering cry. All of this happened too quickly, and the Lich was barely able to conjure up a bone cell to encase himself in. But, how could a mere bone cell hold up against the strength of an ice blast? With a crisp crunch, the seemingly sturdy bone cell broke open. Then, the ice wyrm devoured the Lich. The intense magical wave calmed down all of a sudden as the cave became silent. The 11 members of the advance party stared with wide eyes. They all had expressions of joy when they raised their hands in the air and waited to celebrate once the icy fog dissipated. The only one who remained unaffected was Lin Li, as he had already pushed his mental strength to its limit, using the mental strength that even Anduin was envious of to weave around the crystal in his hand to form an unusual mana channel around them. It was an extremely complicated and dangerous job to completely release his mental strength to form a mana channel, as a mistake could result in the bite of mana. Even legendary mages had to be careful to prevent any mishaps while they were doing it. However, Lin Li was exceptionally anxious, and released all his mana at once to complete this mana channel as soon as possible, even though he risked having his mana dissipate. He knew that he did not have much time. He was right. Just as the mana channel was formed, a crisp sound could be heard from the icy fog. The smiles froze on the faces of all 11 members of the advance party. They saw that the frozen Lich had moved suddenly, and even though it was only a slight movement, the crisp sound rose in intensity like a spreading disease. Then, a loud booming noise was heard, putting an end to this. Ice shards flew everywhere and blocked their vision as everyone felt their hearts sink. The hovering Lich was like a spirit. There seemed to be no change in his appearance, be it the slender magic bone staff he held, the shabby black cloak he wore, or his pale face. The only difference was the layer of black fog surrounding the Lich's body. It was not a thick fog, being only slightly darker in color than his cloak, and made it seem as though there was just a layer of dirt on him if one did not look closely. But this thin layer of black fog was as scary as a magical beast in the eyes of a mage like Adelo, making this archmage at the peak of level 18 let out a surprised yell. Magical domain. Once a mage surpassed level 20 and entered the legendary realm, they became connected to their magic system, and thus were able to create their own unique magical domain. That was the most powerful ability of a legendary mage. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.